The collapse of the American rental market is no longer a distant warning on the horizon. It is happening right now, unfolding in real time, and the data coming in from across the country is far more catastrophic than almost anyone predicted. We are seeing rents in major metropolitan areas plunge by 10, 15, even 20% from their pandemic peaks, a rate of decline that seasoned property managers tell me they have never witnessed in their entire careers. A property manager in Jacksonville, Florida, just revealed to me that he was forced to slash the price on his own rental by $100 every single week, week after week, until a tenant finally took the bait. In Austin, Texas, which was once the hottest rental market in the nation, vacancy rates have tripled from 3% to over 10%, and in some neighborhoods there are now 3 desperate sellers for every single qualified buyer. This is not a minor correction, and it is certainly not the soft landing that the officials in Washington keep promising you. This is the beginning of a rental market apocalypse, a systemic unraveling that will wipe out amateur investors, crush property values, and fundamentally rewrite the rules of housing in America for a decade or more. We humbly ask you to support our work with a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming economic warnings. Because what I am about to share with you, the hidden inventory, the accidental landlords, the Airbnb meltdown, and the complete collapse of investment fundamentals reveals a disaster that is far deeper than the official statistics are letting on. This is just the tip of the iceberg. To understand the sheer magnitude of what is happening right now, you have to look at how we got here, how an unsustainable frenzy of greed, cheap money, and mass delusion created a rental bubble of historic proportions. For years, landlords held all the power. Tenants were desperate. Inventory was virtually non-existent, and rents were skyrocketing at double-digit annual rates that made homeownership seem like a distant fantasy for millions of American families. Property owners could demand first month, last month, security deposits, pet fees, and whatever else they wanted, and there were always 10 more applicants waiting in line. That era is officially dead. The Federal Reserve's war on inflation, which I warned you would have catastrophic second-order effects, has driven interest rates to levels we have not seen in decades. Those historically low rates that fueled the buying mania of 2020 and 2021 are gone, and they are not coming back. What we are left with is a frozen housing market where nobody can afford to sell, and a rental market that is being flooded with supply from a source nobody expected. I call it the accidental landlord phenomenon, and it is exploding across every major metropolitan area in this country. Think about the millions of Americans who bought homes during the pandemic, convinced that remote work was permanent, that they could live in Boise or Tampa or Nashville forever while collecting a San Francisco or New York salary. Those days are over. Corporations are calling workers back to the office, back to Manhattan, back to Silicon Valley, back to Chicago, and these homeowners are trapped. They bought at the absolute peak of the market, often overpaying by tens of thousands of dollars in bidding wars, and now they cannot sell without realizing a catastrophic loss. So they face a brutal, soul-crushing choice. Lose $3,000 every single month on a mortgage payment for an empty house hundreds of miles away, or rent it out and only lose $800 a month. The math is punishing, but the choice is obvious. They are becoming landlords by default, flooding the market with single-family rental homes they never intended to own, competing directly with professional property managers and institutional investors, and driving down rents across entire regions. I want you to really picture what this looks like on the ground, because the human reality behind these numbers is devastating. Imagine a young couple who bought a 4-bedroom house in suburban Austin in the summer of 2021. They paid $50,000 over asking, waived the inspection, and wrote a letter to the sellers begging for the privilege of taking on a massive mortgage. They painted the nursery, they planted a garden. They believed they had secured their piece of the American dream. Now the husband's employer has mandated a return to the downtown Chicago office 4 days a week. They cannot commute. They cannot quit. They listed the house for sale in February, hoping to break even, and after 60 days they had received exactly 0 offers. Not lowball offers, not contingent offers, 0 offers of any kind. The house sits empty, the garden is dying, and the mortgage payment of $3,400 is due on the first of every month like clockwork. So they call a property manager, who tells them the market rent for that house is now $2,200, maybe $2,400 if they are lucky. They are looking at a $1,200 monthly loss every single month for the foreseeable future. Multiply that story by tens of thousands of households across the Sun Belt, and you begin to understand the tidal wave of supply that is crashing into this market. These accidental landlords are not sophisticated investors. They do not know how to screen tenants. They do not know how to handle maintenance emergencies, and they are terrified. They are listing their properties at whatever price they can get, just to stop the bleeding, and that desperation is setting a new lower floor for rents across entire zip codes. This new supply is hitting the market at the worst possible moment, because the smartest tenants have already figured out that the power dynamic has completely flipped. They are walking into property showings with their phones out, pulling up 3 comparable listings within 5 blocks that are $200 or $300 cheaper, and telling landlords to match the price or they will walk. And the landlords are caving. They are caving because they know that a 2-month vacancy, a 60-day stretch with no rent coming in, will cost them far more than just giving the tenant a rent reduction. I am hearing reports from property managers across the Sunbelt of tenants renegotiating their lease renewals and getting $200, $300, even $400 knocked off their monthly rent, simply by showing up with a list of cheaper alternatives. This is a seismic shift. For the first time in nearly a generation, tenants have leverage, and they are using it ruthlessly. I remember when I was a young man renting my first apartment. The landlord held all the cards. You paid what he asked. You thanked him for the privilege, and you never ever complained about the dripping faucet or the broken window latch because you knew he had a stack of applications on his desk and could replace you by sundown. That world is gone. The tenants I am hearing about today are demanding repairs, demanding upgrades, demanding lease concessions, and they are getting them because the alternative for the landlord, a vacant unit bleeding money month after month, is simply too painful to contemplate. Austin, Texas is getting absolutely destroyed. Some neighborhoods are seeing rental rates drop 15 to 20% from their peak, a collapse that is wiping out years of supposed equity gains in a matter of months. Tampa and Nashville are not far behind. Phoenix, the poster child of pandemic-era migration, is seeing a rental correction that is accelerating by the week. These are not small, manageable pullbacks. These are market crashes happening in real time, and the official data does not even capture the full scope of the disaster. What makes this situation far more alarming, and what the mainstream financial media refuses to tell you, is that the official vacancy and inventory numbers are a massive undercount. The statistics you see on the evening news only capture properties listed through professional channels, the multiple listing services, the big corporate property management firms. Industry experts estimate that 70 to 75% of single-family rentals are managed by individual owners, ordinary people who do not use professional listing services, who just stick a sign in the yard or post on a neighborhood Facebook group. That means the real inventory numbers, the true flood of rental supply hitting the market, could be double or even triple what the official statistics suggest. We are flying blind, and the situation on the ground is far worse than the bureaucrats in Washington are willing to admit. Think about that for a moment. The headline vacancy rate in a city like Phoenix might be reported at 8%, a number that already sounds alarming. But if 3/4 of the rental supply is invisible to the statisticians, the true vacancy rate could be 12%, 15%, even higher. That is a catastrophe hiding in plain sight. A shadow inventory of empty homes that is exerting relentless downward pressure on rents without ever showing up in a government report. I have spoken with property managers who drive through neighborhoods and see for rent signs in front of houses that never appear on Zillow or apartments.com. Houses owned by that accidental landlord who just wants to find a tenant and stop the financial hemorrhaging. Every one of those invisible listings is another data point in a collapse that is far more advanced than the official narrative would have you believe. And while accidental landlords are flooding the single-family market, an even bigger problem is brewing in the multifamily sector, a problem that will take years to unwind and will cause immense financial pain for developers, banks, and investors. During the pandemic, multifamily developers went absolutely crazy. They saw rents surging, they saw occupancy rates at 98%, and they convinced themselves that the demand would continue forever. They broke ground on tens of thousands of luxury apartment units, betting that the wave of high-income renters would never end. In markets like Jacksonville, Florida, developers added over 7,000 multifamily units in the past 12 months alone. But that is nothing compared to what is coming. There are thousands more units currently under construction, and once developers break ground on these projects, they cannot stop. The bank financing commitments force them to finish, regardless of market conditions. So these new apartment complexes are opening their doors into a market that is already oversaturated, and they are getting desperate to fill units. They are offering 2 months free rent, 3 months free rent, no security deposits, no application fees, and some are even throwing in big screen televisions and gift cards just to get bodies in the door. When a family is looking at a $3,000 single-family rental that requires first month, last month, and a hefty security deposit up front, versus a brand new luxury apartment offering 14 months for the price of 12, with a resort-style pool and a state-of-the-art fitness center, the math becomes painfully clear. The incentives are incredible, but they mask a deeper rot. Even with all the free months and all the concessions, the base rents on these units are still astronomical. A luxury apartment might give you 3 months free, but you are still paying $2,800 to $3,200 for the months you do pay. And that brings us to the core, inescapable problem that is destroying this market from the inside out. Even with all the discounts, all the incentives, all the desperate concessions from landlords, people still cannot afford these prices. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out in the real world, because the numbers are absolutely brutal when you lay them out on the kitchen table. A young nurse in Tampa, Florida, is earning $62,000 a year, which works out to just over $5,000 a month before taxes. She is a good tenant, responsible, never misses a payment, the kind of person every landlord claims they want. She finds a one-bedroom apartment listed at $2,400 a month. The landlord, applying the traditional 3 times income rule, requires her to earn $7,200 a month. She does not qualify. She never even gets to fill out the application. Now multiply that scenario by the entire workforce of a major American city. The teachers, the firefighters, the police officers, the retail managers, the medical technicians, the vast middle of the American labor market are all being mathematically excluded from the rental market by underwriting standards that were designed for a completely different economic reality. The landlord, sitting on an empty unit, eventually realizes that his pool of qualified tenants is so small that he may never fill the vacancy. So he lowers the income requirement to 2.5 times rent, then 2 times rent. Then he starts waiving the credit check, then he accepts a cosigner, then he throws in 2 months free. By the time he finally gets a lease signed, his effective monthly rent has dropped by $400 or $500, and he has taken on a tenant with far more financial risk than he ever would have accepted 3 years ago. That is the market we are in now, a market where landlords are trading income for occupancy, quality for quantity, simply to survive, and the downward pressure on rents from this dynamic is not going to ease anytime soon. The median household income in most American cities has not kept pace with the rental increases of the past 4 years. The math simply does not work anymore. When a landlord requires a tenant to earn 3 times the monthly rent, a standard underwriting requirement that has been in place for decades, a $3,000 rental means the tenant needs to bring in $9,000 per month, or over $100,000 a year. In the vast majority of American cities, that income threshold eliminates 80 or 90% of the potential renter pool. Landlords are waking up to this brutal reality, and they are starting to panic. I am hearing from property managers who are now lowering their income requirements from 3 times monthly rent to 2.5 times, just to expand the pool of potential tenants. That is a significant, almost desperate shift, and it tells you everything you need to know about where this market is headed. The qualified tenant pool is shrinking, not growing, because wages have been left in the dust by years of stratospheric rent increases. The Fed's inflation crisis, which they created with their reckless money printing, has crushed the purchasing power of ordinary American families. They are being squeezed by higher food prices, higher energy costs, higher insurance premiums, and there is simply nothing left over for rent. We are reaching a breaking point, a point where no amount of free months or concessions can bridge the gap between what landlords need to charge to cover their exploding costs and what tenants can actually pay. I have been warning about this affordability cliff for years, and now we are standing at the edge, looking down into the abyss. The fall is going to be long and painful, and there is no safety net at the bottom. And while the long-term rental market is buckling under the weight of its own excesses, the short-term vacation rental market is experiencing a complete and total meltdown, a collapse that is going to pour gasoline on this fire. The Airbnb gold rush is over. Nationally, occupancy rates have crashed from around 57% to roughly 50%, and in some oversaturated markets the declines are far steeper. Cities that were once hostile to short-term rentals are now fighting back with massive fines, new occupancy taxes, and strict regulations that make it nearly impossible to operate profitably. Property owners are getting hit with $30,000 penalties simply for violating local ordinances they did not even know existed. Insurance costs for vacation rentals have absolutely exploded. I am hearing from owners who report their annual premiums jumping from $1,200 to over $5,000, an increase of more than 300%, driven by insurers who now view short-term rentals as high-risk commercial operations. Markets that saw massive short-term rental growth, like Phoenix and Austin, are now completely oversaturated. Phoenix went from 5,000 Airbnb listings in 2017 to over 21,000 today. The math simply does not work for most operators anymore. The nightly rates are collapsing, the occupancy is vanishing, and the regulatory and insurance costs are soaring. So what happens when short-term rental owners give up? They dump their properties onto the long-term rental market, adding even more supply to an already oversaturated market. With over 2 million homes currently operating as short-term rentals nationwide, even a small percentage converting to long-term rentals creates massive additional supply pressure. We are watching a cascade, a domino effect where one segment of the market collapses and drags down the next, and the next, in a chain reaction that will not stop until the entire edifice of inflated rental values is brought back down to earth. I want to zoom in on what this Airbnb collapse looks like for an individual owner, because the financial wreckage is truly staggering. Consider a man who bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet Phoenix neighborhood in 2019, specifically to operate it as a short-term rental. He paid $320,000, put 20% down, and financed the rest at a rate of 4%. For the first 2 years, the property was a goldmine. He was grossing $65,000 a year in rental income, covering his mortgage, his taxes, his insurance, and his cleaning fees, and still pocketing a healthy profit every month. Then 2023 arrived, and everything changed. The nightly rate he could command dropped from $180 to $110. His occupancy fell from 85% to 50%. His insurance premium tripled after his carrier reclassified short-term rentals as high-risk commercial properties. The city of Phoenix imposed a new licensing requirement and an additional occupancy tax that ate another 8% off his top line. By the end of the year, he was losing $2,000 a month on a property that had once been a cash machine. He tried to sell, but the market had frozen, and the offers he received were $40,000 below what he owed on the mortgage. So he converted the property to a long-term rental, listing it at $2,000 a month, which was $600 less than his monthly carrying costs. He is now bleeding cash every single month, trapped in an investment that has become a financial prison. Multiply that story by tens of thousands of Airbnb owners across the country, and you begin to see the scale of the supply wave that is about to hit the long-term rental market. These conversions are happening quietly, one property at a time, but in aggregate they represent a flood of new inventory that will depress rents for years to come. Property management companies are completely overhauling their strategies in a desperate attempt to survive what is coming. The successful ones, the ones who will still be in business a year from now, are being brutally honest with property owners about market conditions, even if it means losing clients to competitors who make unrealistic promises. The days of listing a property at an aspirational price and waiting for the offers to roll in are over. The smart operators are getting aggressive, slashing prices weekly, sometimes daily, until properties actually rent. One property manager confessed to me that he had to cut his own rental price relentlessly, week after agonizing week, because the carrying costs of vacancy, the mortgage payment, the taxes, the insurance, the maintenance far exceed the lost rental income from a lower monthly rate. A property sitting empty is a financial hemorrhage, and landlords are finally learning that lesson the hard way. They are becoming flexible in ways that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. They are accepting pets, even large dogs, because when 80% of American households have pets, excluding them eliminates most of your potential tenant base. They are allowing roommates, co-signers, shorter lease terms, anything to get a paying body in the door. The days of being picky, of screening for the perfect tenant with an 800 credit score, are gone. Now, it is about survival, about finding anyone who can qualify, anyone who can pay the rent, and hoping they do not trash the place. Maintenance and property condition have become critical differentiators. Tenants have choices now, real choices, and they are gravitating toward properties that are clean, well-maintained, with fresh paint and decent landscaping. These things are no longer optional. They are required to compete in the new market, and landlords who neglect their properties are going to be the first to go under. Let me tell you what the sharpest property managers are doing right now to keep their owners afloat, because the tactics they are deploying reveal just how desperate this market has become. They are conducting what they call rent surveys, but not the kind that look at historical data from 6 months ago. They are sending staff out every week to drive the neighborhoods, to call competing properties, to monitor new listings in real time, so they can adjust pricing within days, not months. They are advising owners to offer signing bonuses, not just free rent, but actual cash payments of $500 or $1,000 to tenants who sign a 12-month lease. They are preemptively offering lease renewal discounts, calling tenants 60 days before the lease expires, and offering a $100 monthly reduction to stay, because the cost of a turnover, the lost rent during vacancy, the cleaning, the repainting, the marketing, can easily exceed $5,000. They are investing in professional photography, virtual tours, and even staging, things that were once reserved for home sales, because in a market flooded with options, a listing with dark, blurry cell phone photos will be ignored entirely. They are responding to maintenance requests within hours, not days, because they know that a tenant with a broken air conditioner in August will break their lease and find a new apartment by sundown. This is a level of service and responsiveness that the rental industry has never had to provide before, and the landlords who refuse to adapt, the ones who still think they can list a property, sit back and collect checks, are going to be obliterated by the market forces that are bearing down on them. For real estate investors, the fundamentals have completely collapsed. The math that worked when rents were rising 15 to 20% annually and interest rates were at historic lows is now a complete disaster. Properties purchased in the last few years are bleeding money. I am talking to investors across the country who are writing monthly checks of $800, $1,000, sometimes $1,500 just to keep the lights on, just to cover the gap between the mortgage payment and the rent they can actually collect. Property taxes have exploded as local governments, facing their own budget crises, have jacked up assessments to capture the phantom gains of the pandemic boom. Insurance costs have doubled or tripled in some markets, driven by natural disaster risk and the broader collapse of the insurance industry in states like Florida and California. Repair expenses are crushing budgets. The cost of a new roof, a new HVAC system, a simple plumbing repair has gone through the roof thanks to the same inflation that is crushing tenants. Investors who built their models around perpetual appreciation and steady rent growth are watching their portfolios implode in real time. The cash flow is gone, replaced by negative monthly returns that eat into savings and retirement accounts. The supposed wealth they had built on paper is evaporating, and for many of them, there is no escape hatch. They cannot sell because the market is frozen. They cannot raise rents because tenants cannot pay. They are trapped, and the trap is only going to get tighter. I want to walk you through the numbers on a typical investment property purchased in 2021, because the math is so catastrophic that it deserves to be examined in detail. An investor bought a single-family rental in a growing Phoenix suburb for $450,000, putting 20% down and financing the rest at a rate of 3.25%. His monthly mortgage payment, including taxes and insurance, was $2,200. At the time, the property could rent for $2,800 a month, giving him a comfortable $600 monthly cash flow. He was patting himself on the back, telling his friends at barbecues that real estate was the only path to wealth, that you could not lose. Fast forward to today, his insurance premium has tripled, adding $300 a month to his carrying costs. His property tax assessment has been adjusted upward, adding another $200 a month. The market rent for his property has fallen from $2,800 to $2,100, a 25% decline. He is now looking at a monthly loss of $600, a complete inversion of his original cash flow. He cannot refinance because rates are now 7%. He cannot sell because comparable properties are sitting on the market for months with no offers. He cannot raise the rent because his tenant can find a dozen cheaper alternatives within a 5-mile radius. He is stuck, writing a check every month to subsidize a tenant's housing, watching his savings dwindle, waiting for a market recovery that may not arrive for years. This is the reality for thousands of investors who bought at the peak, and the financial pain they are experiencing is going to ripple through the broader economy in ways that most people have not yet begun to comprehend. I remember the housing crash of 2008. I remember the foreclosures, the empty streets, the families loading their belongings into trucks in the middle of the night. I remember the feeling of watching an entire asset class that everyone said was invincible, that everyone said could only go up, collapse into rubble. What we are seeing now in the rental market is different in its mechanics, but identical in its hubris. The same blind faith in perpetual growth, the same dismissal of risk, the same desperate belief that this time is different. It is never different. The cycles of greed and fear are as old as markets themselves. I remember walking through a new subdivision in the Inland Empire of California in the summer of 2008, a place where every house had a for sale sign in the yard, where the only sounds were the wind and the distant hum of a lawnmower nobody was paying for anymore. The feeling I had then, the cold certainty that the entire edifice was about to come crashing down, is the same feeling I have now when I look at the rental markets in Austin and Phoenix and Tampa. The signs are all there. The overbuilding, the speculative excess, the desperate incentives, the investors who believed the good times would never end. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes with a precision that is almost cruel. The officials in Washington, the Treasury Secretary, the Fed chair, They will stand at their podiums and tell you that the economy is strong, that the consumer is resilient, that the housing market is stabilizing. You can keep believing them if you want. But the data on the ground, the vacant apartments piling up in Austin and Phoenix and Tampa, the desperate landlords slashing prices week after week, the Airbnb owners dumping properties onto an already flooded market, tells a very different story. The froth is coming off this market with a violence that will shock even the most pessimistic observers. The recovery, if you can call it that, is years away. Markets with massive overbuilding like Austin, Phoenix, Tampa, and Nashville could see rental price pressure continue for years, not months. We are looking at a lost decade for rental properties, a period where investors who bought at the peak will never recover their capital, where landlords will be forced to operate at a loss or walk away entirely. I have to be honest with you about something, and it is not easy for me to say. Even as I describe this rental market collapse, even as I lay out the data showing rents plunging and vacancies soaring, I need to caution you against celebrating too soon. The destruction of landlord profits does not automatically translate into affordable housing for ordinary Americans. In fact, the long-term consequences of this correction could make housing even less accessible for the people who need it most. When amateur investors get wiped out, when the accidental landlords finally walk away from their underwater properties, those homes do not simply vanish. They get sold, often at distressed prices, to the same institutional investors and private equity firms that have been buying up single-family homes by the thousands. Blackstone, Invitation Homes, and their ilk have been waiting for this moment, sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in dry powder, ready to scoop up distressed assets at pennies on the dollar. The rental market correction could ultimately result in an even greater concentration of housing in the hands of a few massive corporate landlords who have the capital to weather the storm and the patience to wait for the next upcycle. The small landlord who bought one or two properties gets destroyed, but the giant institutional investor with a $50 billion war chest simply acquires his assets and expands its monopoly. The tenant who celebrated when rents dropped 10% may find, 5 years from now, that every rental on her block is owned by the same Wall Street firm, and that firm has the pricing power to raise rents in lockstep across an entire metropolitan area. This is the dark, uncomfortable truth at the heart of this correction. The pain is real, the collapse is real, but the ultimate beneficiaries may not be the renters who are finally catching a break. They may be the very forces of financial concentration that have been distorting the housing market for decades. I wish I could tell you that this correction would end with affordable housing for all, but that is not how the system works. The system is designed to consolidate wealth in the hands of those who can survive the downturns, and this downturn will be no different. The rental market correction is real, and it is accelerating. For landlords, the message is brutal but simple. Treat your tenants well, price your units competitively, and pray that your carrying costs do not overwhelm you before the market finds a bottom. For tenants, this is your moment. A rare window of leverage in a system that has been stacked against you for years, but do not confuse it with a return to affordability. The base rents are still stratospheric, and the broader inflationary pressure on your grocery bill, your utility bill, your gas tank is not going away. For investors, the easy money is gone, and it is never coming back. The era of buying any property, slapping on some gray paint, and watching the rent checks roll in is over. What comes next will separate the survivors from the casualties, and there will be many, many casualties. The storm is not coming, it is already here, and the waves are only going to get higher. But this rental collapse is just one piece of a much larger economic disaster that is unfolding across America. Financial stress is at record highs for 70% of American households. The housing market is entering a very dark chapter, and a tremendous amount of pain is ahead. The ship is taking on water, and the lifeboats are few. What are your thoughts about this unfolding catastrophe? I want to hear from you in the comments below. Thank you for watching.